We got a quick screencast here just to demonstrate the difference between history and culture, which is at the center of the global studies class. As I go to the first slide here, we see this big circle here with little circles inside of it as a symbol for the past. And as I click here the first time, you can see this big circle is represented by the past, all actions and thoughts by all individuals in all times and places. That's a lot of stuff, and that's why the circle is so big. Everything that's ever happened is a part of that circle. As we move inward here, we'll see that some of this is only the events that are observed. So there's a lot of stuff that happens, but not everything is observed. Not everything is noticed. And so all these things in the large circle, some of them may not have been noticed by anyone, but a smaller set of that are the things that people actually noticed. The next circle inside are about things that are observed and remembered. So someone saw them and maybe remembers them and relates them to other people. And that's obviously a smaller group. We move further in. Not only do they have to be remembered, but they have to be recorded. Certainly things that happened hundreds of years ago or even 1,000 years ago, if they weren't recorded, they've been lost to history. They've been lost when the last person that knew about them died if they weren't recorded in some way, being it carved in a stone wall, written on papyrus, recorded, is something to send it to the next generation. As we move further inward, now we've got the records that have actually survived. People might have observed, remembered, and recorded things, but those things are lost. And only the records that survived are the ones that we use to put together history. As we move further into the smallest circle, they have to be usable and believable. There are records that survive, but that aren't usable or believable. And the ones that we have access to that we actually believe to be fact represent this small circle. Now, the point of this is that perhaps history is something that we actually know very little about, and we're studying just a tiny little fraction of what has actually happened. And that's kind of interesting and exciting knowing that we know so very little and there's so much room for discovery out there. As we move forward to the next slide, history is the interpretation of evidence regarding the past. We can use primary and secondary sources. Remember, primary is someone who is actually there, someone who observed that event. A secondary source is written about it or recorded about it later. Someone who wasn't actually there heard about it and then wrote about it or relayed that information in some way. The one of the key points here is that every society and generation reinterprets history according to their own standards and morals. Sometimes history is a matter of perspective. What I believe influences my view of history, and sometimes history is written by the winners. They get to write what actually happened. In the case of wars, the victor in the war might be able to write about it and determine who was right, who was wrong, what were the key points, and why it's important. So it's important to know that there isn't one view of history. It's based a lot on the individual that studies history or writes history. They write it based on what works for them. What factors can influence a historian? The era that they live in can influence what they write. The social structure of their social class. Someone who's from the upper class might write history differently than someone in the lower. Their own religion might influence it. Technology, politics, education level, the region that they come from, and their gender. If we're talking about region, a Southern historian might view the Civil War differently than a Northern historian. If we're talking about social structure, someone from the upper class might view the Red Scare or socialist revolution around the world in a different way than someone from the lower classes. And certainly in our modern era, someone of a different religion might view events differently, and obviously politics. Democrats and Republicans in this country's case might view events differently. Who makes history? Well, traditionally it's nations or countries, and really the leaders of those countries, the decisions that they make. A president, a prime minister, a king, an emperor. Normally we're reading about their actions in history, but it's important for us to note that individual people often make history, or groups of people often make history and change the world. Do you want to be remembered by actions of leaders? This is the basic idea that when we study history, we should look at more than the actions of leaders, because certainly we are not the leaders, and what we do matters, and what individual or groups of people do alter events and change society, even though they're not leading the country. Those are just some thoughts about history and the idea of what makes history. Lastly, Why global studies? Well, we're going to study the world, and we are going to study what some leaders do, but we're also going to try to focus on the culture of each place, the study of people and societies, meaning not necessarily the leaders, but the how the average people or groups of people alter society and alter history and events. We're going to try to examine all human activities, again, not just the leaders of the countries, and look at what how those cultures or those behaviors make that place unique. This is just a quick intro. Hopefully, this helped you to understand this slideshow a little bit better. If you have any questions, just ask your instructor.